Sorry. Those of us at PHSA Corporate are on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I really am trying to start my land acknowledgements with a thank you to the Indigenous people of Canada for their immense patience with this process. And that seems like a good way to introduce who I hope is my new friend, Shane Pointe, who I'm sitting beside here. He's a knowledge keeper of the Sulksan, and he's here to offer us his welcome in this work. Sulksan is a proud member of the Pointe family, Coast Salish Nation, and an equally proud member of this Musqueam Indian band. He's been in the service of the BC Indigenous community for the past 50 years. Shane's motto is Nutsamat, which means we are one. Please join us in a warm welcome for Sulksan Shane Pointe, who is here today to help us open in a good way. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Oh, see you where and now. Hooks in squall. CM Slaney Sas Squall My dear friends, my relatives who are here, I'm first asking the Infinite to please open our hearts and our minds to the work and the words that are going to be said today. Asking, please. I'm also saying, I just noticed now there's a couple of gentlemen, but in my chant, I'm saying to you, ladies, CM, Coast Salish Languages Leader, CM Slaney, CM Sweka, gentlemen. I'm saying in the chant to you, female leaders who are here, please lift up the minds and the hearts of the citizens of Canada. Lift them up so that they can behave better towards Mother Earth. When I'm saying Mother Earth, sacred Mother Earth. When I'm saying Mother Earth, that's the closest I can get with my limited understanding of Coast Salish language to saying climate. Your words today are going to help each other. What we need to do is use those words and that help to lift up the citizens so that we can do a way better job for Mother Earth. Without Mother Earth, without the climate, we don't exist as human beings. I'm also asking in the chant for a greater understanding from all of us that Mother Earth is finite. Therefore, we as human beings are finite. We only have a certain amount of time. And what we need to do is use that time to the best of our abilities so that everyone is healthy and everybody is well and taken care of. With that, I want to say thank you for the invitation to be here today. In our way of being here as Salish people is to be generous. Generous with our knowledge, generous with our time, generous with our kindness. That's why my motto is Sulksan. We are one. As human beings, we are all one. In that oneness, we all have a responsibility. So with that, great honor for me, my friends, my relatives who are here, to sit next to this lady. I've seen her now over the past few years. I've heard her words. I've taken what she said seriously for myself, but my family as well. My sister and I have conversations about what we've seen her say, what she's heard. My sister's words, she says, that big lady on the screen, she's telling us to behave. And I'm going, there we go. There we go. So in gratitude for my sister and myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this to you.
Oh.
I'm going to give this to you.
So much.
That's from my sister. To you, I'm going to tell her when I see her later. I gave the big lady the puppy. She's going to go. And she's going to go, which one?
Put it on there.
The doctor one. So that's for you.
You can tell her that I'm not so big when I'm not.
It's beautiful. For folks online, Sulksan's been wearing a beautiful beaded toppy.
Oops. Yeah. Where's my glass?
It's nice to have assistants. I have to get an assistant.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you
much.
very much. I need to be off. Thank you, CM Slaney, Heitzapka, CM Heichka, CM Saweka, Heichka, CM.
Do you need a copy for the interim?
Pardon?
Do you need a copy for the interim?
Oh, gee, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sure will. Was this a great call? Thank you very much.
This moment.
Oh, you're gonna take that to
Yeah.
all the way.
Beautiful. Thank you. We'll send
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.
We'll get them sent to you.
Okay, thank you.
you.
Okay. For folks on the line, I definitely encourage you to to introduce yourselves in the chat. I don't think we have time today to go through full sets of introductions, and please let us know the traditional territory that you're on and any thoughts you may have. Housekeeping for folks in the room. Apparently we have a couple of fobs that will allow people into the washroom. Cherito's got those if you need them. And we have a very tight agenda today. So we're going to have a bit of context setting from Dr. Tam, a review of the annual report, which I hope everybody's aware of here and has had some time to review already. There'll be a question and answer period. There is a link to a Slido webpage where you can submit your questions. And then we're going to move into some local case studies from BC for presentation and discussion. And then we've got quite a bit of time still for the discussion at the end of those presentations, which is nice. And then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up and maybe talk about what's going on provincially in the field of climate and public health. So at this point, I will pass it over to Courtney Smith, who's here with us from the Public Health Agency.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Dr. Henderson. I'm Courtney Smith, Interim Regional Director for the Public Health Agency of Canada. I'm really delighted to be reprising our role as conveners and connectors in the public health space here in BC. I don't think we need much context setting from me. I think the sort of point of the day is to dive into the report. So I'll turn now to Dr. Tam for her remarks on the annual report. And I think we've got a slide presentation as well to go along with that. There we go.
Great. Hope people can see the slides. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And it's amazing to be here and to talk about a topic that I think all of us are very engaged on and very passionate about, which is climate change and health. And I'm very grateful that I am here in Vancouver, the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Salish nations. I am a newcomer to Turtle Island, an immigrant to this country, and I normally live and work in the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of what's been going on in British Columbia, and I'm going to try and do that in different places across Canada as well, because I know that there's a lot of activities, and there may be opportunities for people to link up and to learn from each other and to share best practices and to translate them in your everyday work. So I think my report really is a jumping off point for me to engage and to listen to what some of your sharing of knowledge and knowledges. And so I'm really grateful to be here today. And maybe we can turn to the next slide. So every year I do a report. It's actually mandated in the Public Health Agencies Act. And last year, and in fact the last 2 years, during the pandemic of COVID-19, I took the opportunity to really highlight what the key really considerations and important aspect of emergency preparedness responses for things like pandemics that can apply to other crises, including environmental ones, which points to the fact that all of our checklists and preparedness plans don't really include the concept of a whole of society response, the importance of trust and social cohesion, and which is really not necessarily very much highlighted in the existing plans. And last year's report really is to take a moment to explain to a whole range of stakeholders what public health is and why it's an important moment for us to think about our next iteration for the transformation of public health. And so that sets the stage really for this year's report. And next slide, please. Because it's really looking at that transformed public health system and how it would work in the context of a very complex health and environmental and social and economic issue, which is climate change. And Dr. Shannon Waters contributed to a very important report on visioning the future of the First Nations, Inuit and Métis public health. That's also a foundational document. And here's an excerpt from it, which sets the stage really for some of, I think, what our work could be going forwards, which is to look at the ecosystem as our health system, as our health. I think our elder who introduced and put us into this open-hearted, open space for discussion really covered off the key concepts, which is we really have to shift from this human-centered anthropocentric worldview, unlearn and relearn that we as humans are part of a complex and interdependent web. We're dependent on Mother Earth that supports us, and we must place the well-being of our environment at the center of all of our decision-making. And that the recognition, support, and advancement of Indigenous sovereignty is needed to protect the environment. And after all, if we do that, everybody benefits because Indigenous sovereignty is sustainability. So that provides a really good framing from last year as we head into this year's report. The next slide, please. And this is just an outline of what the report chapters are, but really what I was trying to do in terms of objectives is to mobilize the public health system as a whole, every part of it, and what we can do around climate change action. So that's within the public health system, but one of the strengths of public health is our ability to work within a complex intersectoral space. So it's how do we establish us as a key collaborator, convener, and leader in the climate change landscape to promote health and health equity. And the reports are based as much as possible on data and published literature, but also in the grey literature, and informed by experts. And the journey on the development of the report involves a lot of input from experts, including Indigenous experts. Next slide. So before I start, I just want to acknowledge that we did look at many different holistic interdisciplinary ways of approaching climate health relationships. And there's many different framings out there: planetary health, One Health, eco health. I was trying to figure out all of these things as I was trying to do this report. And of course, the Indigenous worldviews preceded all of these public health frames. And to me, is actually the most holistic way of looking at climate change. But in the report itself, we did focus a bit more on One Health because that's where public health kind of started to do some of this work. But by no means is the only way to frame what collaborative holistic action could look like. And so I think the first section, I won't go through this, but all of you know the wide-ranging impact of climate change on health, which also includes mental health. And but I think our role is to make sure that we bring the socioeconomic, ecological determinants of health together and look at really instill equity within the work that is being done, because I think there is increased recognition that health might need to be at the table of climate action, but it's done a little sporadically around the country and doesn't really holistically consider some of the equity considerations. And at least that's what we found when we were going through the report. So the next slide. So last year's report described some of the essential public health functions, and which can be used to frame a range of actions from upstream and downstream, from health promotion to emergency response itself. There's, of course, we need to deal with the immediate and the urgent. There's no choice. We must do that. But also begin to instill the concept of the upstream approaches that public health can bring. And I think that does line up quite nicely with mitigation and adaptation as well in the environmental health and climate change context. And last year's report offered the different kinds of building blocks of how we execute the what's on the left-hand side of the slide. And then out of that came this year's report, 5 areas of public health action, which we called a roadmap. But they're fairly sort of broad strokes, 5 different areas that we could work in. First is implementing a range of interventions, as I said, from anywhere from health promotion to emergency preparedness response. But secondly, support and apply that equity lens to climate change. And really, I think to decision makers, they don't necessarily get the concept of equity, or to climate actors who may or may not be familiar with our way of looking at equity, they will understand that we have to prioritize actions according to the community specific needs, to tailor the action to the immediate risks and the communities facing disproportionate risks. So, and also the most important part is enable community participation and co-development of plans and policies and programs. It also includes environmental justice, in which no population suffers unjust and disproportionate environmental harms. And of course, environmental justice is then informed and led by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis concepts of justice as well. The third area that we suggest is we address evidence gaps. So building knowledge on climate health connections, including through research, surveillance, and Indigenous knowledges. And I'm very happy to see that Environment and Climate Change Canada now has an Indigenous science division led by an incredible Indigenous scholar. And so I think all of that is going to bring together multiple views, multiple perspectives of how we tackle this really challenging issue. Fourth is public health. I think certainly in everything that we do looks at interjurisdictional, intersectoral collaborations. We never do anything alone. So within the health system, ecosystem, public health, I think, is the leader in trying to link the health system to other sectors. The healthcare system has a lot to handle and has roles in climate action as well. But I think we are, very expert at looking at intersectionality and multiple disciplinary ways of tackling a problem. And so finally, where we can demonstrate system leadership while advocating for climate action, of course, includes the need to prioritize dedicated resources to inform coordinated action, shifting to low carbon health systems, and strengthening the foundation of public health systems. It also includes culturally safe practices and meaningful engagement, Indigenous self-determination, and integration, really Indigenous knowledges into climate action. Next slide, please. So I said that the report development process included purposeful approaches to recognize the strong leadership of Indigenous peoples in climate action. And some of the quotes, including the 2 on this page, were included in What We Heard report process, and we will be publishing the What We Heard report. That will give you a lot more granularity on some of these key wisdoms that were provided to us as we're developing the report. And really highlights the concepts of the need to decolonize our systems and to have multiple ways of knowing, including these other disciplines that are indicated on this page. Next slide, please. I already talked about the Visioning the Future report, but I also took a lot of content consideration from the Climate Change and Indigenous Peoples' Health in Canada, which is the second chapter of the report published by Health Canada, looking at health risks related to climate change. So finally, in the way forwards is really trying to package all of this, next slide please, into three areas that we could advocate on and take immediate action on. One is very specifically integrating climate action into the public health system, all of our programs, policies, and actions. Secondly is to put health at the table of climate action, which we just talked about. And thirdly, of course, in order to do that, we need to build a climate resilient health system and the workforce with training and supports and tools, and in order for us to play our part in health adaptation. And I hope that some of this framing and making clear what contributions public health can make, not just to enable a healthy health and well-being in the population, but also play a critical enabling role in the goals of other sectors and ministries. So next slide, please. And so some of the supplementary products are highlighted on this slide, but one of them, because many of you come from the academic sector, I just wanted to highlight a CIHR Catalyst grant that will provide funding opportunities to support research that's aligned with climate change priorities identified in the report itself. It's quite a lengthy document, but because we had to fit in everything that we heard, there are many areas of knowledge generation. We thought it would be best to just publish, just about everything. So it's quite a lengthy thing, but I would use that to go to granting agencies, basically, and granting councils and advocate for their support in this area, because when I looked around, there really wasn't a lot of research funding in what we just talked about. So really in closing, I think what I wanted to do is to convey that action brings hope. There's a lot of negativity and concerns about climate change, including in our youth. But we can take action, and really specific and concrete ones, and with that comes hope that we can slow things down, we can adapt to the situation that we're in. So with that, I'm really looking forward to hearing some of those specific actions and programs and innovative ideas that all of you have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. That's highly appreciated. We thought we'd take a few minutes just to open the floor to any discussion or questions that folks want to raise. We have our Slido link open, so please do feel free to send in comments and questions on Slido. And for those in the room, maybe just give me a quick signal if you've got something you want to say, and we'll take it from there. Oh, Dr. Henderson.
First, I'd suggest if you're going to ask a question, it's a nice opportunity to give a quick introduction to yourself. Second, can you tell us anything about how this report's been received so far?
I might be biased, I don't know. I would love to hear what you've heard. What I've done in the initial moments is there was not a lot of media interest, because I wasn't necessarily expecting there to be, like, you're dealing with COVID-19, it's not the same thing. So my media and public engagement has been fairly focused. So there was one podcast that people kind of heard from this end, because I got friends who phoned me and said, oh, I heard you on What on Earth, which is very, maybe fairly popular amongst people interested in climate. And then a CBC interview. So I was fairly select. And I wasn't disappointed by that because I didn't think that was really where I necessarily would resonate at this point. But as COP is going on at the moment, and there's many other events just around this time, and potentially at the time of the release of the National Adaptation Strategy, I'm hoping to leverage those kind of moments to communicate more about the report and the public health role. Secondly is I did take the report to Environment and Climate Change Canada, and which I think it was very well received from the Deputy Minister and the senior management. One of the key comments was, yes, it's very aligned with what they're doing, and there may be colleagues at this roundtable who are from ECCC. But it's also some of what they observed as the behavioral science and behavioral approaches that public health can bring to affect behavioral shifts that might be needed in adaptation and other means, because they've seen what we did in the pandemic itself, getting whole population shifts in behavior and how to protect themselves. In some ways, this is what you're going to be doing with climate adaptation as well, whether you talk about Lyme disease or preventing yourself from getting heat-related injuries or severe impacts. So I think there'll be many other opportunities to bring that to the table, and also different concepts of knowledges. I think will be very helpful. And then, of course, I can engage other departments, including ISC and CERNA, that are very much focused on Indigenous health, and climate change is very important in those departments. So I think those were my sort of initial experiences. And this is my first regional roundtable. So we'll see how this goes today.
Can I tag on to
Yes,
Sarah?
please do, yes.
Hello, hi everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Lydia Ma with the National Collaborating Center for Environmental Health. I'm the manager there. Nice to see you again, Dr. Tam, and Sarah's our scientific director. So I want to tag on to this question around mobilizing this fantastic report into the hands of those who need to understand it. And I'm almost thinking that it's almost easier to preach to the choir, public health. So I'm thinking that the action points that was in one of your slides, if we could distill some practical key points and put it in front of the intersectoral partners. And so NCCEH is a specialized knowledge translation specializing organization. I mean, part of our mandate is convening. So everything you talked about earlier is like check, check, check. That's what we like to do. So convening, brokering conversations around those who design our built environment, for example. Loved your 2017 report on focusing on housing built environment. Talking to the planners, talking to the urban designers, talking to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, who's got this big action plan on climate, and it's almost like putting health into their conversation at their table, but making it real. It's not unreal to everybody now.
Mhm.
Every single person has experienced directly or indirectly this strong, compelling impacts of what's gone on these last several years. And yes, Dr. Huslas is nodding their head, but at the same time, it's like, what can we do about it? It's not, is it enough resources that put to it? How do we smartly allocate resources to put the action forward? And I'm almost jumping ahead to one of my questions that I wanted to ask about displacement communities. And it's not about displacement I was talking about migrating. we're gonna have parts of Canadian populations that have to leave where they call home. And because NCCEH works closely with frontline environmental public health professionals, it's always on my mind to think, how do we help them be capacitated to anticipate influx of people into under-resourced, overstretched local public health units and all the attendant issues that might occur around that. So I don't expect answers, but I think that this is a very, very opportune time to engage outside of health. But then how? How do we get them to everybody roll up their sleeves and let's get an action plan?
So the first area that you talked about the built environment is an area of opportunity for sure. And that's what I did with the very first report that I delivered on really designing healthy living and the concept of the built environment and how it affects your health. And using that report, I was able to engage with urban planners and other sectors, engineers and others. But more importantly, I was able to engage with people who were funding the smart cities initiatives and others, so that at first when I went there, they said, well, we don't think smart cities is about health. And I said, I guarantee to you that smart cities will be about health. And lo and behold, over half of the submissions to that process that gave a lot of money, by the way, was actually about health as an outcome. And we were then able to be part of the team that analyzed the submissions, et cetera. And that has very big impacts. And some of them was actually about mental health as well. The submission from Nunavut, I remember, was about youth mental health. And that was their Smart City initiative. And they were one of the winners. So I think there are definitely ways that once different departments understand where public health comes from and the importance of population health. And I do think it is much easier now that people see the very real impacts. And I've always felt that public health can frame climate change into tangible, very tangible ways that people can see climate change. Because, greenhouse gas levels and temperature changes doesn't really, it's not very relatable. Whereas if you talk about the very specific health impacts that we all know about, that whole giant range of health impacts, everyone can see something in that, as I think you were just saying. So we will have, I think, an impact on the behavioral shifts and informing the adaptation aspects. But I always like to think that I can help other departments better deliver their objectives and spend their money wisely and more effectively and efficiently. And we can probably, there is momentum, at least from where I'm sitting in the federal context. So I'll be watching very carefully to see how things go. And then wherever possible, put public health forward as a contributor, I think. And yes, displacement and migration is a very real concern, both immediate and into the future. And whether you're talking about the permafrost shifts or indeed international population migration, Canada is a country that receives many immigrants and refugees, and there will be more of them that are climate-related crises. So we will be working with global affairs, immigration, and others to anticipate and be able to welcome, I think, displaced people from around the world as well. I think those media pictures of Pakistan, of droughts in Africa, and it really hits home, not just our immediate domestic climate crises as well, Europe. And so I think you have to work with the other departments, basically. But if we can contribute data and we can project and anticipate the health needs, I think that would be very helpful.
I'll go to a question from Slido. How might communities be supported to work with public health to advance community-based climate action plans? Much of the barrier to advance communication and engagement relating to local climate action is capacity and resources. Thoughts on that?
I think that speaks to that very last column of the way forwards, which is we need to make the case to support capacity building. Now, one program that I'm not sort of directly linked with, but I think it's probably going to be useful is the Health Adapt program, for example, from Health Canada, where some resources can be provided to communities to assess risks and health vulnerabilities based on the geography, the makeup of the community, and the social and economic determinants and in indigenous cultures and ways of knowing. I think some of these are just they're like premature babies, and that's how the infancy of some of those programming. And I think they'll be looking at how well those grants and contribution efforts deliver. So there'll be some evaluation that goes with it. So I'll be watching really carefully about how some of this kind of support could help. But as I said, the Indigenous Services Canada, CERNA, and maybe our environment departments can comment, but they also are looking at ways in which communities can be supported to fully understand the impact of climate within their own contexts. So I have to say I don't know enough about Health Adapt. Some of you may in fact be, I think Vancouver, people from Vancouver Coastal Health, very much into that project. So they may be able to provide further comments.
Another one from Slido is, we've talked a little bit about slow onset climate events, and we're seeing and yet we see many manifest already among communities. How can we, rethink the urgency necessary to respond to some of these issues? I guess the nexus between the urgency piece and public health. If you've got thoughts on that, Dr. Tam.
Yes, I think it speaks very well to the public health framework, and whether you're looking at it upstream and downstream, or the fact that you need to do both, you have to actually, you have no choice. You have to manage the immediate, urgent things, but at the same time, don't forget the fact that you need to constantly, in a more sustained way, tackle the longer term and the more preventive and the more sort of health promotional practices. One area I was speaking to Pam early on is actually about the concept of health promotion during a crisis, and particularly prolonged ones. During the pandemic, I was asked to talk about, well, if you're just focusing on health protection and infectious disease, what about the importance of health promotion? I said, well, health promotion was very much part of the pandemic response, and health promotion itself will be part of the climate change response as well. So you're tackling both up and downstream and using all of these essential public health functions more or less at the same time, even though the initial perception is that they're on a different time frame. But I think if you were speaking to decision makers, you can't just talk about the long term. You're going to have to talk about the immediate, which will drive some of the longer term considerations as well. And mental health might be one, of course.
I'm scanning the room for other questions or discussion points. Do we have anything else on Slido? We've got a practical question about the CIHR Catalyst grant and when the competition goes live. I don't know if anyone here can answer that question, but other thoughts before we move on to our case studies that I've there. Oh, there are a few more. Okay.
Yes. So I think the the most practical thing that I can do about the CIHR customers is already kind of announced. And so you can go to the website, but the moment that it comes live, I'll try and make sure the regional offices and others know about it.
Yeah, that's great. One interesting comment, we're hoping to discuss the core competencies public health needs to engage on this at the municipal level to promote climate resiliency. Do you think this is a conversation public health needs to have?
I actually think the best examples have happened at the local level in terms of the current public health actions and climate change. In Canada, as in any other public health challenge, is we don't knowledge translate, knowledge mobilize, and replicate best practices very well. And in fact, that's part of the role of the NCCs as well, is knowledge mobilization. Even though every community has different experiences because of the complex nature of the context around climate change, there's got to be things that people can share. And I think when you're talking about the heat-related emergencies, anywhere in Canada that could experience a heat dome effect could learn from each other about how to prevent the severe health impacts and mortality that comes with that. So, the planning and the built environment work is really done at the municipal and local level right now. Much of it, basically. So absolutely, I think that's actually the level at which public health is going to play the biggest impact. The question is resourcing, right? So why this is linked with my last report is we are trying to advocate for a transformative public health system that can do all of these things. The question is this whole boom and bust thing that we keep experiencing. So I think as leaders and advocates, we've just got to keep demonstrating the value add of the public health approach and the public health specific concrete things that we're going to do. That's going to immediately address some of the impacts. But yes, absolutely. And I know that I mainly interact at the federal provincial level on my day-to-day basis. But what I felt is that with all other reports, using them, I've been able to engage other actors, NGOs, and local levels easier. I do that outside of the FPT context that I work. And that's been actually really rewarding. And I hope that because of that, I can translate across the agency. There was a CIHR grant that was put out on the built environment as well. And I was able to participate in that. And out of that came some really interesting research as well as ideas. I think that we can bring forward. I think the city of Victoria won something in that one. And that city is on the cutting edge of innovation on many fronts as well.
We've got 1 minute left and a fairly brief question, although the answer may not be so brief. Do you have any reflections on how public health should balance mitigation and adaptation?
What? It's not a 1 minute question.
No, I think
I kind of answered that. You kind of have to do it, but the mitigation side, I think, is the bit that's the least understood. And I think we have to focus on the adaptation for sure. But to explain the health co-benefits and where public health, if we were at the table, can help with mitigation as well as reap the health co-benefits, that's what my report sort of spent a little bit of real estate on.
perfect. Dr. Tam's a pro. I'll give you the floor, Dr. Right on time.
Right on time, miraculous, thank you. So we're going to go into 3 different case studies of work that's been happening locally, and each of our groups of presenters have 10 minutes. I have introductions here that I can read, or I can give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves, which I always think is a little bit nicer. Is that okay for you?
That's fine, and I'll give you I'll just give you a summary. Yeah. So I think we are next.
You
right?
are next,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tam, everyone here, to our Elder Point. It's a very wonderful thing to be here. My name is Maya Gislison. I'm in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University, an associate professor there, and this is Angel Kennedy, who's my PhD student, but also the research manager for a suite of projects that we have. What we wanted to, I guess I'd like to begin by saying, Dr. Tam, there's something so wonderful about this report. It speaks boldly. I think it speaks truth. I think it is articulating both many of the struggles that we've been working on for a long time, some of us, but also ways forward that are a reflection of, the evidence that we've been distilling for a long time. So I really appreciate that. And what I want to share with you today is one way we've tried to really ground in that complexity by focusing in on children's health, and particularly on mental health, which is one of the first ways that climate change can impact a person even before an event occurs. So, yeah, thank you. The next slide. So just really, as we have already, just acknowledging that this way of thinking in an integrated way is an old way. And that we are so grateful to be on the traditional Coast Salish territories, but also to be trying to learn how to do this work in a two-eyed seeing kind of way. Next slide, please. So as I said, our work focuses in on children and youth, because we know that they are the ones that are living. Children born today have never lived in a world that's not contoured by climate change. And what we choose to do in the world we create now is determining, their life course, their life chances, their health, and so on. So we care very much about how they're doing and what they need within this complexity, and trying to ground it in the places and the systems that impact them most, which are the health system, educational system, and then their living environments, those social and ecological spaces they inhabit. Next slide. So in our research, I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but we really are trying to work in the nexus that's really described in this report, linking climate change, thinking about youth and mental health, thinking about intergenerational climate justice being motivated by an ethics and morality, and then really thinking about how we do education, how we unlearn and relearn, how we teach, and how we create new pathways forward. And we're really interested in, as you were talking, like really grounding, what do we need to do to change things? So we're interested in the protective mental health benefits of engaging in issues. So integrating the arts and sciences so that we have a way of understanding climate change that links our brains, our heads, our hearts, and our minds. And that we're also really interested in what young people have to say, what they're experiencing in their communities, and foregrounding, working in the places that youth know and live and can see the benefits of their actions. And we do this work by, behind the scenes, convening interdisciplinary conversations, intersectoral conversations, trying to build a more comprehensive understanding of the issues, the problem space, the solution spaces that we have available to us, and then bringing youth into those spaces, hearing from them about what they need, what they see, what their visions are, and trying to enact that. And doing that with the principles of equity, of sustainability, cultural sensitivity, and so on. And we're particularly interested in what are the rural and remote, northern indigenous realities, and committed to co-benefits. So the projects we work on have to do more than one thing. They have to be good for the environment, addressing climate change, good for mental health, but hopefully good for more than that. Next slide. So we use this whole of society approach, but we articulate it further as really trying to have a whole of person, whole of community, whole of life, and whole of planet approach. And so we take that through our work. And so on the next slide here, I just wanted to say that just to give a very brief example of some of the fruits of this kind of research. So we know we want to have health in all policies. We know that there's direct and indirect, short, medium, and long-term impacts to climate change. And as it says in the report too, there are so many ways in which health is impacted by the activities of policies and sectors that are not in the health space. So part of our work is trying to bring those together. And when we place youth at the center, we see, and we think about mental health, we see that there's traditional ways, mental health is impacted by pre-existing issues, but it's also impacted, for example, by policy, by politics, by the lack of action the adults are taking. We see that it's impacted by social media, by news, by discourses in society. So this, rampant exposure to disinformation and crisis-informed communication. And then we also have learned that the school system, that our very curriculum around climate change is traumatizing students, even leading them to leave the classroom, to decide not to have kids and so on. And they're also learning it in such a passive way. They're told this horrible and scary story and then have nothing to do about it. So when we do that integrated work, we can begin to see how we need to work across these spaces. So over to you.
Thank you. And so we're just going to summarize a couple of the projects that kind of help animate this importance of working in integrative ways to both understand the impact of climate change, but then also how to put it in action towards adapting and preventing future climate effects and supporting youth in their mental health. So one project, Maya mentioned a finding from it, but we're working with educators throughout BC, across rural and remote communities, island communities, all across BC. Some of them specialize in Indigenous education, some art and music, land and place-based approaches. And they really provide us with concrete insights into how youth have a role to play in adapting to climate change, and that they have a sense of creativity that can get us outside of the status quo. And then also how youth are exposed to a lot of information and need support processing that information so that they have a sense of grounded hope and a sense of reality, but also that there's a path forward. And then they identified that art and trauma-based education is one way of tying together this multimodal information and also connecting what they're seeing in the environment, what they're seeing in their bodies. And then we have another project working with health providers and allied health professionals who are working with children and youth in rural communities in BC. And that's really focused on seeing where youth and children are getting their healthcare, even outside of traditional healthcare models and pathways, where the story of climate change occurs in someone's medical journey, especially near climate events. And also how we can leverage existing community assets, even outside of the medical sector, to help support the mental health of youth, and then also what role youth can play in the co-design of health policy in these communities. And then we have some projects on intergenerational justice and equity, and helping to strengthen utilizing an intergenerational justice lens. So we're sharing tools and frameworks to enable the amplification of youth voices in climate change, priority setting, and scaling up responses. And then we also partner on a lot of projects. So the Environment Community Health Observatory Network is one that Maya is a co-PI on, and Margot Perks at UNBC is leading. And for the the past 5 years, they've focused on strengthening intersectoral capacity to understand and respond to the health impacts of resource development, with an increasing and continuing focus on intergenerational equity, watershed governance, and data equity. And then we partner with communities as well, Cortez Island being an example, in taking a co-benefits oriented, equity oriented approach to developing a climate action and resiliency plan, which is really putting to action all of the intersectoral work that we're doing. And then we partner across Canada as well and globally with projects on conservation and Indigenous-led conservation and biodiversity projects.
Yeah, that's great. So just as a summation, really you can see this co-benefits theme running through an asset-based approach. Next slide. And then really coming back to this message, and the youth we work with and the people who support them are so clear about this message. We have all the data we need right now to really take informed action. So indeed, let's do it. Let's address the interacting drivers of children and youth's mental health in this current situation, and be really active and action oriented. And on the last slide, it's the work that we're moving along very much is trying to, as health people, public health scholars, also be touching into the school system, thinking about curricula, and working with educators who are doing work that's trauma-informed. It's integrative of arts and sciences, action-oriented, experiential, and project-based. Taking that all hands-on-deck approach, and really foregrounding equity in our work, because then that's one way we actually listen to the silences in the data, bring news stories, do mixed methods, really make sure that we're starting to tell the story of what's happening for a range of people. And then we are also trying to work on authentic engagement of youth in our work across sectors, in the policy space, and really trying to find out what is their vision for co-benefits and what is their vision for how to build this future that we have to really manifest very quickly. So that's what we wanted to share with you, and just really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We'll hold questions until our discussion period at the end. So I think all of our next speakers are online. Peter, Flo, and Brianne. If you could all turn your cameras on, then we'll be able to see you in the room. And once again, I'll let the three of you introduce yourselves quickly and head into your material.
Great, thank you. I think Peter is going to share the presentation. Maybe we'll do the intros then. Brianne and I are going to provide a very brief introduction to set some context, and then maximize the time that Peter, on behalf of Tea Creek, is able to speak about the work that's happening at the grassroots level with their organization as demonstration. So I work for Northern Health as the Chief Population Health Dietitian. And Brianne is the grants coordinator. So we'll just spend a minute speaking about our work. So just some context. Northern BC is about 2/3 of the landmass of BC and has a population of 300,000 and includes 54 First Nations communities. Northern communities, as we know, experience unique challenges to food availability, accessibility, affordability, along with experiencing disproportionate impacts of climate change. In January of this year, the Ministry of Health provided funding to regional health authorities for community food action in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And that initial funding needed to be used by March 31st, and it's actually now annualized. So with that money, Northern Health partnered with the Northern Region of First Nations Health Authorities Food Security Lead and Dietitian, which are roles created through a community-led needs assessment to design a community granting program. And Brianne will speak ever so briefly about that granting program.
Yeah, and so that granting program is called the Rural, Remote, and Indigenous Food Action Grant, and it was through Northern Health's collaborative partnership with FNHA that allowed us to modify our granting processes to reduce barriers and cultivate cultural safety. This was done through providing pre-application support, offering a simplified application intake, and shifting away from a rigid final project evaluation to a flexible legacy summary. As we continue to grow this program, we want to emphasize the importance of ensuring future health promotion funding and initiatives be inclusive of food systems and Indigenous food sovereignty. During our initial intake, we received 71 applications, all of which illustrated links between food sovereignty, food security, and climate change in the North. Of the 71 applicants, we were able to fund 6 projects, one being Tea Creek Farms. They are leading and supporting gains in food security and Indigenous food sovereignty within the Northwest. And while we were pleased to contribute a small amount to grant funding to support their initiatives, we would also like to acknowledge how they have worked incredibly hard through many hurdles and barriers to get to the place they are now. So with that, we greatly appreciate Peter as a representative of Tea Creek Farms being here today to provide us with an overview of Tea Creek's incredible work. So with that, I will pass it to you, Peter.
Thank you, Brianne. I just want to check, am I coming through okay? Everybody can hear?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Peter Cook. I'm program manager at Tea Creek. I've been working with Tea Creek for about 2 years. I do program development and management with them. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking on behalf of Jacob Beaton, who is the owner and operator of Tea Creek. And he's on vacation right now, so he's given me permission to share. And I'm sharing on his behalf. A lot of this information is from him and his wife, who own Tea Creek, and a lot of our shared experiences. Jacob is Simshan. His traveling name is Zap Gwenskik, and he is the owner and operator of Tea Creek. So yeah, I'd like to introduce you to what we're doing. Just give me one moment here. Okay. So Tea Creek is located in Kitwinga, British Columbia, on Gitxsan territory. We are at the intersection of a few climate zones, so coastal, northern, and interior. So we work with many First Nations in the area. We're in the heart of Gitxsan territory. We work with the Nisga'a to the northwest, Simshan to the west, and we also work with the Wet'suwet'en to the east. And we are hoping also to work with the Tahltan just directly north. So we're at the really center of a lot of different intersecting nations. So in 2020, 2021, in response to climate crisis and lack of food and the pandemic, we launched Tea Creek. So we purchased a farm in Kitwinga and started farming, started selling our food. We realized the first year that it worked, but it didn't. People in our area just can't afford fresh food. The pandemic really stressed that for most people. So we decided to change into a training institution. So now we're a Tea Creek model, and we do Indigenous food sovereignty training specifically for Indigenous communities in the North and across BC. So we are Indigenous-led 100%. That is critical to us. We're culturally safe programming, and we are land-based. So we do all our programs outside, minimal classroom contact, mostly hands-on and experiential. So we do trades, training, provide trades and training, but with our special focus on food sovereignty, getting food sovereignty initiatives going in Indigenous communities. So our manifesto, I just want to highlight the main ones here that are really important to us. The first is we're Indigenous-led. So I myself am not Indigenous. I'm probably the only staff who's not Indigenous. So 86% of Tea Creek staff is from the local community and is Indigenous. We hire cultural mentors from our community to lead programs. We'll always be culturally safe. That's really, really critical to us. So we want to bring in cultural mentors and a sense of cultural safety for our participants that doesn't exist in a lot of other training programs. And we're land-based. Critical to us, you know, we're healing on the land, we're growing on the land, we're providing food for our community on the land. And we are Indigenous community-led. That means we're not just Indigenous-led, but we're led by the communities that we work with. So we work in partnership directly with our communities and respond to their needs as opposed to try to impose our needs onto them. A brief overview of our model. Key factors are mental, spiritual, and emotional health, physical health, and well-being. Those are the 2 health dimensions. That comes through both provision of food, training, confidence. We want to be a leadership training center, but also get access to the outdoors, physical health and well-being. So we have a focus on agriculture, wild food, medicine, culture, and then climate adaptation. And we provide skills, trades, and work experience for our Indigenous participants. So what does Indigenous food sovereignty have to do with climate change and health? I think we've already made some connections here. 2020 was the start of the pandemic, record heat, record rain, flooding, fires, price increases on food. In the north, we were heavily impacted, empty shelves, and then the price increases of food, specifically impacting Indigenous populations, who are already facing a lot of barriers, especially in northern rural communities, which is where the Northern Health Regional grant really came into practice here. So all of this is a case for sustainable, regenerative, localized Indigenous food, led by Indigenous communities. So what is Indigenous agriculture? Why is it so important? Well, most of the foods that we're eating have actually been produced by Indigenous communities on Turtle Island. Classic examples are potatoes, tomatoes, corn, squash, but there's many others. Indigenous agriculture encompasses field crops, aquaculture, wildlife, food forests, medicines, and more. Indigenous peoples in our area and across Turtle Island had very active historical Indigenous agriculture initiatives. So, for example, in our area, potatoes were heavily cultivated for a very long time, and we're working to restore a lot of the Indigenous varieties of potatoes. Indigenous agriculture is also naturally regenerative. So when you can hand agriculture back to Indigenous populations, naturally it would become regenerative based on a lot of the models and practices that are already part of the culture. And lastly, we generate culturally appropriate foods. That doesn't necessarily mean we're always going out and harvesting just salmon. That's a huge component of the Gitxsan diet, for example. But we're also producing foods that have been eaten for the last 200 to 300 years since contact. So some of the these are some of the traditional foods that are grown. So cabbage, for example, on the bottom right, corn. In the middle, you have the Haida potato, which we're cultivating at Tea Creek with our partners, Forest Sister Farms up in northeastern BC. So bringing back a lot of Indigenous potatoes, cultivars. And then on the left, you see we're doing a lot of food forest regeneration. So regenerating a lot of the wild fruits and things like that are on our 150 acres. A couple notes on regenerative agriculture. We call it Indigenous agriculture because it's naturally regenerative. Carbon sequestration can be done through regenerative agriculture, rehabilitating soil, food forests, composting, all those things. Creating fresh, bountiful, nutrient-dense foods for people who live in rural areas. A lot of people don't know we can grow this much stuff up north. It's totally possible. We grew 20,000 pounds of food this year, and that's just a small amount of what we can do. Tea Creek has 4 quadrants. We have our administration group. We do a lot there for our participants. Builders group, carpentry, plumbing, machine works, nutrition and hosting. So we do cooking training, all sorts, and our growers group. So that's our agriculture focus. So yeah, some of our successes, we have greenhouse manufacturing, which we look at as climate adaptability, growing cheap greenhouses. These greenhouses cost $10,000 and they're all locally made by our Indigenous participants. So greenhouses are going to be key to growing food. We're aware of that, season extension, and things like that. So we're really getting that going. We also have trained a lot of Indigenous crews to go into the communities to till up land. So to till up fallow land that's sitting in their communities that was previously farmed. So really important that that's led by the community members that come to our site and train. And a surplus of culturally appropriate food. We've already gone over that. So again, 20,000 pounds of produce donated into the community, all for free. This is a part of our initiative. So we train people, but we grow tons of food on our only 3 acres of our 150. We want to double, triple this, and then start getting communities growing their own food on some of the land that's accessible to them. Huge success this year. graduated over 100 people from 6 different nations. That's double from last year. So we're ramping it up, and we're really going for it. Jacob is the fellow in the middle here, total visionary, been working with Indigenous peoples for 25 years in consulting. And on the right is Andrew George, famous Indigenous chef. So we can offer direct apprenticeships on our farm for trades development. And this is with the ITA, BC Industry Training Authority. So our results, the main one I want to highlight is the bottom one again. It's that we have 86% Indigenous full-time staff from the local community, and we're putting food and jobs back into the community that are, climatically relevant, I'll say. So we have 6 First Nations partners. We've had 30 Indigenous communities knocking on our door, so we can't possibly provide this much to this many communities. So our whole goal here is building a leadership training hub. So you'll see that in our vision. We want to be a hub to train people and send them back into the community so that they can do the work in their community that needs to be done around food sovereignty, around climate action. So we want to be an agricultural hub for the Northwest, but we have a provincial and national scope. We've already been working with the provincial government, Ministry of Agriculture. We're the UN's Food Hero of the Year. We're just like, let's go, let's do this. And it's clear that nations are ready. We've had so many people knocking on our door that want this. Our end goal is actually just resilient, self-determinant Indigenous communities. That's our main focus. And to us, that means that's climate action right there. So I just want to go over a couple more details to wrap up here. As far as health, we have a lot of our participants reporting back mental health benefits and health benefits from our programming. And I want to invite you as well to check out, I'm happy to share this slide with some of our links, check out our website, but most especially check out our Facebook page, because that's where you see all the action on the ground, the actual stuff that we're doing to get this going. And we'd love support. We just need support, get the word out there. We want to scale up, we're ready. We are going to suggest a pilot project working federally, provincially, anybody in this room. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you, Brianne and Flo, for inviting Tea Creek, the opportunity, and thank you all.
Oh, thank you very much, Peter and Flo and Brianne. Appreciate it. We'll ask Heather Deegan to turn on her camera now for our last case study. And Heather, once again, I'll let you give a quick introduction to yourself to maximize the time you have to tell us about your work.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. My name is Heather Deegan. I'm a director in population health and interior health, and I oversee several teams with a focus on community and family health. And one of the teams that I have responsibility for is primarily interested in striking and maintaining relationships with local governments to work together to create environments where it's possible to make a healthy choice, or it becomes easier to make a healthy choice. And within that work, and now recently as alongside of that work, we've been taking a focus on climate change and climate impacts. I just want to be sure you can see my slides.
Not yet.
Okay. It doesn't seem to be sharing. Charito, do you have access to my slides from the room?
Yep, totally. I'll bring them up for you, Heather.
Awesome. Thank you. So as I begin, I would just like to acknowledge that Interior Health recognizes and acknowledges that we are collectively gathered on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the 7 Interior First Nations. And our region is also home to 15 chartered Métis communities, and it is with humility that we continue to strengthen our relationships with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people across the interior. And I am joining today from the unceded territory of the Syilx people, also known at this moment in time as Kelowna. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be among esteemed colleagues and learn about inspiring work that's happening And I have the opportunity to share with you on behalf of communities and a team that has supported the work, some efforts that have been focused on heat and helping our communities prepare for extreme heat. Next slide, please, Charita. So this is a map that depicts the interior health region. You'll notice different colors in the maps. Those different colors signify the 7 different nations throughout the Interior Regional Health Authority catchment. And since 2018, Interior Health has been working with Health Canada's Climate Change and Innovation Bureau to support planning and response to extreme heat in rural and remote communities, and specifically working with the implementation of the HARS framework, so the Heat Alert Response System framework. And if you're not familiar with that framework and you have an interest in heat and extreme heat, I would encourage you to look into that. It's an incredible resource that Health Canada has developed, and it has domains that help guide communities through their own heat planning. Interior Health is one of 5 geographically defined health authorities in BC. We have a population of over 800,000 people. We cover 215 square kilometers, and the region includes 59 municipalities, 10 regional districts, 16 school districts, 54 First Nations, and 15 Métis chartered communities. And 8.8% of the population within the region identify as Aboriginal. And out of those 59 communities, those municipalities, 51 have a population under 10,000 people. So we have many small rural communities, many mountain passes, and the geography presents several challenges. So why is Health Canada Innovation Bureau interested in working with Interior Health and in the interior region? It's because we have some of the hottest communities in the country. And you can see the pins on the map indicate the different communities that we've done some purposeful work with over the past several years. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to review the slide, but just this really summarizes the role that we have played in supporting community-led initiatives. And this speaks to the comments that you made earlier, Dr. Tam, from the report. Really that engagement with the community and creating those partnerships in that space to learn from community what is meaningful and relevant for them leads to the most successful interventions or initiatives. And we've experienced that role clarity is very important from the very early conversations with community. So health plays a critical role in the work, and we cannot lead the work in its entirety. We do have a support role to play and a contribution, just like all the other partners at the table. And I'm going to speak to that contribution in a bit more detail. Next slide. So I want to speak in a little bit more detail about a community that we've done probably the most in-depth work with. It's a community called Ashcroft. Ashcroft has a population of about 1,500 people. Just under 50% of the population is over 60 years of age, a population we know is vulnerable to heat impacts. It is situated in a rural setting. It's about a 95-kilometer driving distance from Kamloops, which is the next largest urban center, and Kamloops has a population of about 90,000 people. Ashcroft is extremely hot based on historical temperature data. My program had an existing relationship with this community based on some past work with the municipality and the community on some age-friendly initiatives, and they had an interest and a willingness to work together with us on a heat preparation initiative. The purpose was to seek out, in collaboration with Ashcroft, local approaches to heat planning and implementation that were relevant to the community's unique context. So how can the heat alert response system or the HARS framework be applied here? Some of the aspects of the HARS framework had been informed by experiences in larger urban centers, and we just wanted to understand if it was relevant and applicable in a smaller rural context. The investment on behalf of Interior Health was funding. So again, funding from Health Canada, we flowed as much of that as we could directly to community and to develop resources to help inform community work. We had some dedicated positions from the health authority. Some of my program staff, we had medical health officer, Dr. Sue Pollock, dedicate her time. We had an epidemiologist working on data. We provided coordination, again, brought forward data and heat health information that was relevant to community. And the work began in 2018 with really an invitation to work together towards innovative approaches. And Ashcroft would be in a position to represent small rural communities in other parts of BC and perhaps other parts of the country. And as it turns out, that was a really important feature for Ashcroft. They developed a sense of pride of doing the work, leading work on behalf of other small rural communities, recognizing that sometimes rural gets overlooked and resources can sometimes go to larger urban centers. So that became a real point of pride for the community. All the work resulted in a HARS plan specific for Ashcroft, and it also helped us understand best and promising practices that may be relevant for others. The findings through the work that we've done with Ashcroft over the years have resulted in a toolkit, and I'll show you that on the next slide, that we've developed for interior BC communities, so a heat response planning toolkit. We've also had the opportunity to participate in many knowledge exchange events, workshops in multiple communities. We had a publication this year in the Canadian Journal of Public Health to really speak to more of a practice audience, and then multiple presentations by various members of the teams. The Federal Heat Community of Practice, Ontario Public Health Conference, the Canadian Public Health Association, et cetera. Again, to try and share the work and the experience with other practice communities, and really developing a simple and concise HARS template that could perhaps be applicable and relevant to others. The next slide. I think some of the most important learnings for the project team is that the community-driven approach that utilizes existing assets within the community is integral to the success of the work. We need to understand existing infrastructure and embed the work in existing systems that are understood in community and that are effective. Many of these small communities have limited budgets, limited staff. They just can't take an additional initiative or project on. But through conversation and collaboration, if we can explore and uncover systems that they know and that work well, we can embed this work within those systems. It's also really important to understand existing relationships and networks in community. And in Ashcroft and many other communities, neighbors knowing each other and looking out for each other. Some other additional specific initiatives or actions that emerged in Ashcroft were pre-heat notifications so that people could become heat aware, understanding the potential risks, direct mail outs into the community mailboxes, or even posting a poster in the post office. So through conversation with community leaders and citizens, we understood that the post office in Ashcroft was like a third space. If you wanted to know what was happening in the community, what had happened, what was coming up, you went to the post office. That's where people hung out. So we often heard from Ashcroft, it's not very sophisticated, but a poster on the bulletin board in the post office or flyers in mailboxes would be most effective for our community. So we're not always looking for sophistication. We're looking things that are effective and relevant for the community of interest. Next slide, please. This slide shows some pictures of other community workshops that we have hosted throughout the region. We hosted community-focused workshops in the Central Okanagan, Osoyoos, Kamloops, and Lytton. And these efforts at community engagement also worked to inform the toolkit. The photo of the toolkit was on the last slide, and you can find that toolkit on the Interior Health website. Again, providing communities with practical information and resources they can use when developing their own strategies to respond to extreme heat. Next slide, please. So these other workshops that have happened throughout the interior region, they occurred prior to the more recently developed BC HARS framework. and the associated funding support that has come alongside to help enable those actions. But at the time, what we heard from our local governments and community partners in the workshops is that concurrent and cascading emergencies really put communities under pressure. Wildfires, wildfire smoke, and heat all come hand in hand. We also have a housing affordability crisis in many communities, similar to other areas of the country. We're also managing a toxic drug supply public health emergency, and all these big occurrences have a huge impact on small communities with small resources. They're also looking for guidance and role clarification. Who carries what responsibility and who provides a lead? And again, we found that this was really important at the outset of those conversations, is really understanding who's going to play what role in moving the work forward. And then acknowledgement that collaboration across sectors is required so that we can each bring the best to the table. Everybody has a piece of the puzzle, and how can we contribute for collective action? And that also regional collaboration is an opportunity to pool resources. So these small local governments often reside under a larger regional government. How can we work together to pool resources for greater efficiencies? Next slide, please. So I just want to speak briefly about a newer initiative that we're undertaking, again with support from our partners at Health Canada. So we're working now to understand if what we know about heat preparation through the HARS experience is relevant and meaningful to Indigenous communities. So currently we're working with 3 communities in the interior, Hunnikwitine First Nation, Tiltiket First Nation, as well as Métis Nation, BC. So we're interested in learning from these communities historical approaches and practices, heat impacts, anticipating heat, and how to prepare for and respond to heat, and if there are any elements of the HARS framework that are relevant, that are timely, that are useful. We're kind of midpoint in this project, and we're working with community to develop culturally safe and appropriate heat response planning projects. And we have developed some case studies for reporting purposes, but we haven't yet gotten to a stage where we can share the work in detail. But on the next slide, I can give you some high-level kind of early learnings that we have experienced through this work. On the next slide. So these projects are ongoing until March 2023. And at this stage, we've really it's been revealed that the importance of community-led planning is really critical to the success of this work. Communities are acutely aware of how they've been impacted by heat, as well as other climate hazards. They are ready to have their voices heard, and they want to be prepared to take action. Financial support, additional dedicated capacity for this work is really, really important. For band staff to be able to integrate heat planning into broader planning, there is very limited capacity in these communities as well. So funding has to allow for additional dedicated capacity to engage in this work. Also, we need to be mindful that time is required for holistic planning. It's really important to be patient with the process. It takes time to integrate heat planning within a system in a way that can be used in other emergency situations and fits within community plans. Funding timelines really need to consider this in a realistic way. So the next slide, just some kind of pearls that we've learned through the experience is that it's really important to continue to raise awareness with our provincial and federal partners, the importance of funding resource contribution for these community-led heat planning efforts. We also have learned that it's important to examine the emphasis currently placed on qualitative data in assessing climate change vulnerabilities and impacts. It's very hard to get quantitative data at a small community level. We come up against that challenge all the time in our communities in the interior. However, the qualitative data is also really important to the work to help understand the evaluation aspects, to inform decisions, and how we measure success. So really marrying the quantitative when it's available together with the qualitative bring greater value to the process. Also, working with federal, provincial, and community partners to continue to find opportunities and platforms to share what's been learned and share tools that may benefit other communities is really critical to success. We have been able to use what we've learned to inform provincial and federal decision-making tables, such as the BCCEH committee that's been working really hard over the last year. Myself and colleagues have been able to bring the rural lens and that experience to those conversations. And also, again, in line with what we heard earlier, amplifying messages to provincial and federal levels that climate action and key public health functions, as well as the need for dedicated public health capacity to carry out this work. It's an emerging field, and public health has a strong role to play in the interest of mitigating the impacts on a population level. So the next slide is my final slide, and I just want to, person walking alone, I'm here representing a big team of people that has made this work come to life. 2 medical health officers, Dr. Sue Pollock, Dr. Sylvina Mima, project team, Jenny, Katie, Kelly, Sylvina. We've had students help us along the way, Gabriel, Amy, and Cole, Daniela and Michelle, CAOs from Ashcroft, as well as many elected officials, and of course our funders, Health Canada Climate Change and Innovation Bureau. We've had a little bit of Health Adapt funding for some mapping of vulnerability, and we've had a little bit of funding from Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. So thank you for the time to share today.
I'll ask all of our online speakers to turn your cameras back on, please. We don't have as much time for questions as we had in the agenda, but I'm glad that we were able to highlight some of these projects. I will start by asking Dr. Tam if she has any questions that she would like to address.
It's been fascinating listening to all the very varied case studies, I have to say. I don't know how this was all put together, but they couldn't be more different, but yet relevant, I think, to the public health action on climate change. I think the different sectors, it gave me some ideas. I mean, obviously, the education sector is, we all knew that was going to be important, and some of the concrete actions that can be done. And I think creativity and how you manage to reach people is done often through science plus art to find innovative solutions. The agriculture sector. So that is a massive sector that will be impacted in so many different ways. And I certainly have heard in other roundtables about support to those who grow food and also regenerate, grow soil, grow good soil, not just the plant, the foods, but the regenerative processes. And but there's a massive mental health and other impacts when agriculture, of course, is heavily negatively impacted by some of these climate crises. And so I think that's, looking for ways to collaborate, but then linking it to Indigenous food sovereignty is just so brilliant. Congratulations on, I'm sure, very well-deserved recognition on the UN Hero of the Year. I'm sure there are ways I'm already thinking about how I, be able to spread the word. So we'll think about that. And of course, the place-based, community-led approach is very important. And on the heat adaptation and mitigation side, I think that's almost one of the most concrete ways that we can show, like by tomorrow, why public health is relevant and we need to play our part, but is that we are extremely relevant to multiple sectors, from public safety to agriculture to the healthcare system because of the injuries and other more longer term health impacts. So I think I'll certainly be connected. I'm very linked to the Health Canada team, and I've been waiting to hear about some of these practices coming out of those funding opportunities. But I think some of what you're saying about grants and contributions from the federal government is something that we've heard over and over again about how do you minimize the sort of administrative complexities. I guess that's the way I would talk about it, but also how we evaluate projects and both the qualitative and quantitative aspects. And I think there's definitely innovation in that field. And also one area that I'm particularly interested in is that multiple departments who work on the climate change file have different streams all over the place. You can't navigate the thing. So is there something that we could do in making the navigation and the understanding of what federal supports there could be more easy to understand and find? I think sounds like it's something that we can continue to pursue. I do have a question on these concurrent crises, and I'm interested in what evidence you have on the opioid crisis, the intersectionality of the opioid crisis and different kind of climate hazards, because that crisis is really having an absolutely remarkable impact at the same time as climate change can only potentially make it much worse. And so how do we work in that space? I don't know if anyone here is focused on that.
You want me to do it or you?
What are you thinking of? Is it the same as what I'm thinking of, our recent plan?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay.
So the NCCEH recently did a bit of a review on that intersection, specifically around extreme events and addiction and the role that environmental health officers kind of end up playing at that intersection. So that's one kind of very small piece of the puzzle, but I'd say the bigger piece maybe our SFU colleagues might have insight into, which is sort of the climate despair and how that may end up intersecting with this crisis.
Yeah, I think it is related. And I think if this whole life course perspective, I think when we look at what clusters of people are being affected, there's often a real upstream driver about being in communities where there's been a lot of either colonization, so disruption and connection to land, there's been resource extraction, there's been some kind of big fissure. And I think that people, as well as many other equity, seeking groups who are leaving communities. So I think how people make their way into these spaces is one thing. I think, when we have these disruptions, it's really, a heat wave or a flood event or all those kinds of things. There are exacerbations on pre-existing issues. And then a lot of it, we don't catch what's happening to people in these crises. And so there can be compounding effects. And they can be very long-term. You just look at, who gets dislocated in a flood event. Well, it's people in kind of low standard housing stock, people who are, renting, subpar houses along the river's edge, and often that's like single mothers. And so, we just have these cascading social and ecological effects, I think. And when we look in an integrated ecological and social determinants of health way, we begin to put together a story, I think, that helps us see that we're not separate from what's happening to the environment and the environmental impacts on communities.
Can I add a little bit to all of this, in that our piece was to bring forward the potential inadvertent neglect of a large group of substance use people, that in a disaster response, they are actually even more vulnerable than we thought, because they shouldn't be using alone, but they could be severed from this support network. And so just bringing forward this concept or awareness to those on the front line could be one step ahead. And of course, I'm really happy to see this work that you're doing on children and youth mental health, because we know they are severely impacted. And we actually know that substance dependency is multifactorial. And this climate crisis is not helping. And the despair could lead to and feed into this dependency. And so it's hard to unpack little bits, but you got to start somewhere. And personally, I feel that public health is not a one size fit all. I think that we talk about public health, community health promotion, protection, it's as if public health is one amorphous mass. But the susceptible populations, we can name them, and there's a bit of underrepresentation on the needs of children and youth in terms of environmental health. So that's the area that we really do want to get into in providing the kind of knowledge translation and convening of connections with frontline practitioners. Yeah.
Do we have anything online?
We have a great question from Slido that I think probably should be open to the group about what barriers are hindering cross-sectoral collaboration for climate change. And I would add sort of the piece around what opportunities exist for cross-sectoral collaboration. So if there are views on that around the group, that would be very interesting to talk through.
I would say, from my perspective, one of the primary barriers is capacity. So if we had the people necessary to do that cross-sectoral work, it would be easier, but we don't. And I think, it's a new way of thinking for a lot of people in public health, where it has been very infectious disease oriented, and it's been more appropriate for us to be in our own little silo. I think COVID started to break us out of that a little bit, but there does, if we're talking about the rebirth of public health, that spreading of the work that we do into a much broader group is essential, and currently we don't have the capacity.
I think there's a hand on screen.
It's your hand raised.
Oh, there's Heather.
I have a response.
I think public health capacity is big. And I also think that when we come forward with health data to community and a health problem, it's going to impact health. They have limited capacity. So sometimes what we hear is health problem, health solves it. You've got the bucks, right? If we look at the provincial budget, lots of dollars are going into the healthcare system. So I think it's really about relationship and the relationship with community, and really talking in a partnership way, in a collaborative way. Like, yes, we can help. We have a piece to bring to the table, but we can't step into community and lead a community process when so much of the community intel and contribution is necessary to shape what the work will be moving forward. So dollars are the answer sometimes, but opportunity and innovation and collaboration is also the answer sometimes. And health doesn't always have that answer for a rural community of 1,500 people that, the most contact they may have with the health system is the acute side of the health system. So I think that public health resources, yes, but also just framing the conversation and framing the issue in a way that is meaningful to the community, and really, trying to manage those expectations up front.
Great, thank you, Heather. We are at 1 minute to our next deadline, so I'm going to push us along. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for this conversation. Mary, are you online? And if so, can you please reveal yourself?
Hi.
Thank you. We've got you here to give us a bit of an update on what's going on at the Ministry of Health with respect to climate and health in the province, and I can chime in at the end if useful.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and good afternoon, Dr. Tam. Just a pleasure to be here with you today. So my name is Mary Cameron. I'm the director of a brand new unit here at the Ministry of Health called Climate Resilience. We are situated in the Population Public Health Division of the ministry, and we have been born out of our participation in the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy. which is a provincial strategy being led by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, or Climate Action Secretariat specifically. And that includes actions from across the province. And the provincial assessment conducted in 2019 really found health impacts to be of primary concern, and as well as through Indigenous and public engagement on the CPAS. So we have humbly been tasked with initiating a new program in collaboration with health authorities to build climate resilience in public health, but also looking across the health system and across sectors, recognizing, as many across the room have, and in this virtual space have pointed out, that many of the actions that we need to be taking to protect and promote health and the health system lie outside our realm of influence, and we really need to be working together collaboratively to protect and promote health in the context of a changing climate. So we have some under the strategy, which was released in June of this year, we have some admittedly modest funding that we were able to secure through the climate partisan adaptation strategy to support foundational actions being led by the Ministry of Health and health authorities. And those include key priorities or foundational actions to assess climate risks to health and the health system, building capacity of the health workforce and the public to prepare and respond for climate-related health risks, and promoting cross-sectoral collaboration on innovative solutions grounded in cultural safety and health equity. So this is a very brand new unit. We're really getting off the ground and working with health authorities to support them to develop their own programs respectively. So just wanted to let you know what we're up to, and that we hope you'll keep an eye on us and on our partners across BC. We see this as a really great opportunity to leverage and enhance health sector climate action here in BC. And the CPAS also provides this opportunity to work with other sectors through at a provincial level to enhance and apply a health lens to climate action, not just in the health sector, but across other ministries, agencies, and through our health authorities that have those really strong connection points to communities. So please stay tuned and keep an eye on us. We look forward to working with you, and we're building strong connections with Health Canada as well on this work. So I'll leave it there. I know we don't have a ton of time, but I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mary, for introducing this. And I just want to say, when Mary says a modest amount of funding, it is quite modest, $13 million over 3 years, especially when you compare the types of funding that have been put forward for other public health emergencies. So I know that money's not always the answer, Heather, but money does talk. But kudos to Mary and her team for really working to stretch those dollars to make them as effective as possible for the province. So they've committed $300,000 to each of the health authorities, including First Nations Health Authority, to start building capacity within them, and then the BCCDC to really help provide technical support for this. We have a Center of Environmental Health Excellence in the province and deep training in a lot of the content areas, so we can help to support the rest of the province that way. We'll be working towards getting vulnerability assessments done for the whole province over the next couple of years, and also trying to develop that community of practice within the province. One of the challenges in BC, and obviously in many other parts of Canada, is we do have people everywhere. Heather, really laid out some of the challenges of working in the interior, and the others laid out some challenges of working in the north. So how do we get the folks in Atlin talking to the folks in Revelstoke, and just making sure that together as a province we're working towards that. So that's one of the things that we're really hoping to bring to this. And then we have a few more minutes for a little bit further conversation if necessary here. I want to take up more time with the CPAS than is required. So I don't know if there's anything else on Slido or any other thoughts that people want to bring forward in this final few moments.
I did like the point that Dr. Tam made about being able to sort of cut through some of the administrative stuff around funding. And I think that if we can, put more effort on that, that does speak to the urgency piece around this massive problem and how to tackle it. I'm probably not wearing my hat properly as a federal public servant in saying that, but.
But once again, I would make the analogy to something like COVID, where a lot of those barriers were removed because the situation was urgent. This is an equally urgent situation, and I do think that we can look to some of what happened during COVID and try to map it onto what could happen when it comes to climate change.
Andrea's got her hand up.
Sorry.
That's Andrea.
Oh, Andrea. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, I would like to thank you, Dr. Tam, for highlighting the recommendations for the policy change, because that is where truth and reconciliation happens for Indigenous people. And that policy change will trickle down into the health authorities and into the lives of the Indigenous people living within BC and within Canada. So I just really would like to hold my hands up to you and all the hard work that you are doing, addressing this truth and reconciliation of the people within the healthcare system. So I just want to hold my hands up to you. I am an educator with Chimamuk, the Indigenous program out of BCCDC. And Heather, you were totally right about the relationship building with the nations, with the people in the communities, because that's where the change happens. And, we talk about capacity building, and I'm going to put it in an Indigenous lens. In being in my community, I do not have a big PhD and I do not have a master's degree, but I have a lived experience living in my community, and that's where my voice comes from. And when I speak to you about the detriments to health and the things that, you write on your pen on the paper, these are the things that we live with every single day. So to put it in that framework, when we talk about climate change and when we talk about the environment, and we heard it at the beginning of this introduction with an elder and knowledge holder, he spoke of, we are all a part of the environment. We are all a part of Mother Earth, and our time is, and Mother Earth is infinite and our time is very little. So how we do our work and the cross sections of education and health and Ministry of Forests and like agriculture, if we are all able to develop the well-being for Mother Earth, the people will be in better health, not just the Indigenous people, but all people. So it is amazing to see food sovereignty happen and all of these initiatives. And I just would really love to hold my hands up to all of you for being in this space and having these conversations, because they are important. So I just wanted to say thank you and to bring some of that up.
Andrea, you have an uncanny way of saying the perfect thing at the ends of meetings that I'm sharing. So thank you very much. And maybe we should all hold our hands up to each other. Thank you for being here. And we'll look forward to continuing this work together. All right. She always does that.